shoot, whoops, didn't mean to do that. We will go ahead and get started. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. My name is Joanna Nelson, and thanks for joining us. We are really excited about this webinar today, Housing Development Overview, Financing, Planning, and Sustainability. This is a part of our New Mexico Economic Development Department webinar series. We host these webinars every month and talk about subjects around economic development, community development, and financing. All of those things, all of the subjects within those topics we cover each month, usually the last Thursday of the month. And thanks to our panelists that are here today. They're joining in. Kevin Drexel, Sean Colbert from the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority, Edie Dillman, Jonah Stanford with BPublic, and then Alexandra Ladd and Daniel Warwith from Alexandra Ladd from City of Santa Fe and Daniel Warwith from the New Mexico Interfaith Housing. So I do want to share some information before we get started. We will be recording this webinar, so if you have to jump off, feel free to do so. We'll be able to send out the presentation afterward, and we will post the webinar on our YouTube channel. And I would like to say you can check out that channel to see all of our previous webinars. And it's really interesting because a lot of some of the subjects we'll cover today, we've gone into more details on different webinars. So you can explore that and hopefully get some information. And I do want to give you a little bit of background about the New Mexico Economic Development and the Finance Development team. So on our finance development team, we deal with anything around financing, and that is for public projects as well as the commercial world. So we deal a lot with the question, how do we pay for this? And in the public realm, when we're talking to communities across the state, housing comes up, housing development projects and revitalization projects, anything that affects community development. We get the question of how do we pay for this? So that's why we're really excited to have this webinar today and hear from these great experts. But we provide a variety of services, but if you think about it, we play connector a lot, where we are constantly fielding calls and connecting resources to folks. So always think about us as a resource. Feel free to call anytime. Our services are free. We do manage a variety of programs that are around financing, and that is, I'll just go through them really quickly, but the Local Economic Development Act, that's otherwise known as LEDA, our Fund It community group, Business Finance Finder, New Markets Tax Credits, the New Mexico Collateral Assistance Program, the Rural Efficient Business Program, and Opportunity Zones. So if you have any questions on that, you're curious about those and want to follow up, reach out. We can go into detail, or go to our YouTube channel. We've had webinars, I think, on all of these topics. So I think I've covered the bases. I do want to add, I forgot to mention one thing. We will be taking questions. This is your chance to speak directly to these great experts. So as we're going along, type in your questions on the right hand of your screen. There should be a little gray box, and type them as they come to you, and then we will take questions and open it up for discussion at the end of the webinar. So I want to introduce our first speakers, and that is Alexandra, who I think did I spell your name right, Alexandra? I think I did. But Alexandra Ladd from the City of Santa Fe and Daniel we're worth. So Alexandra, just a little bit of background about each of our speakers. She was a part of UNM's planning program, hired right out of that program, and worked for the city of Santa Fe as a housing planner for around 6 years. She has worked as a planning consultant, writing affordable housing plans for several New Mexico communities. Currently works with City of Santa Fe and in a new position, and she administers an inclusionary zoning program, oversees funding allocations from HUD and local trust funds, manages operational grants, and works on affordable housing policy issues. And then Daniel is a community development practitioner and focuses in the areas of affordable housing, economic development, nonprofit management, youth development, and the arts. He is a co-founder of Mix Santa Fe and also a principal at Warworth Associates. He's the executive director for New Mexico Interfaith Housing and is a contractor for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development through Enterprise Community Partners. So these two have lots of insight into housing. So really excited to welcome you guys, and you guys go ahead and take it away.
All right. Thanks so much.
And I just want to say, I've never seen Daniel wear a tie before, so I'm appreciating his headshot. Okay.
Yeah, that's only like 9 years ago. You might not recognize me on the street. So yeah, we're here today to talk about a really unique situation in terms of being able to leverage local donations of the New Mexico Affordable Housing Act, as well as other state funding sources to be able to leverage affordable rental housing development. And in this case, a pretty innovative project.
Hey, Daniel,
yeah.
Daniel, just to interrupt really quickly, I think someone's has some lag on their audio.
Yeah, or isn't muted.
Yeah. So if you're not talking, I guess just mute yourself or make sure the audio is muted on the computer if you're using a headset or a phone. So we can try it again.
Okay. Yeah. So let's see. There's still a little bit of feedback there, but let's see if we can just fight through this. So to dive into it, basically, what we're talking about is, well, I guess first, yeah, let's talk a little bit. We had good introductions. I don't know if there's anything more you want to say, Alexandra, about yourself, your background, or the city's Office of Affordable Housing.
Yeah, I think quickly I'll just add that the city doesn't provide services directly to the community, doesn't manage housing, doesn't kind of do a lot of what people think we do in terms of how we support affordable housing in the community. And this is because years and years ago, the city made a deliberate and very strategic choice to partner with nonprofit service providers and developers, but also through the inclusionary zoning program to really involve the private sector housing development community as partners. And that way, the city's investment in housing are leveraged, 100-fold really. But more importantly, I think services can be provided in ways that are relevant to the community and nimble and not kind of bogged down with all the bureaucracy that the city brings to the table, not to mention what HUD brings to the table. So I just wanted to make that point that this project's a really great example of how that kind of partnership works.
Yeah, that's a good addition. And I'd just add that sort of extrapolating from my bio, I've been working in affordable housing programs and development here in Santa Fe for about a little over 16 years. And so have watched a lot of the evolution of what's happened on the city side with their programs and different things. So sort of also have this historical background of both sort of policy and implementing it on the ground. So with that, we'll jump right in. There's just a little lag on the slides there. My apologies. So Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about the Affordable Housing Act?
Sure, and anyone from MFA who wants to jump in, please do. The Affordable Housing Act allows public resources to be used for the benefit of private entities as long as the purposes of affordable housing are being served. And so just this slide is actually from the MFA. There's a list of who the eligible donors are. Obviously, the city of Santa Fe, we fit into the municipality section, and what the eligible donations are. And this is very similar to how LEDA is structured in terms of the eligibility of what can be provided and supported. I will also make the point that what's not eligible are to pay for services or administrative costs or salaries or kind of any of the programming piece. It's specifically capital and direct financial assistance to income certified individuals. Go ahead, Danielle.
So I can talk a little, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so this project grew out of a couple different needs. The planning for this project started in 2014, but actually arose out of, needs that were identified as far back as 2003 in the Angelou Economic Development Plan for Santa Fe, the need for more lived workspaces for the creative sector. And really what we're talking about in terms of conditions on the ground in Santa Fe are a need for over 5,000 units of housing, and in some cases, probably as many as 3,000 units of housing for folks below about $30,000 a year, earning less than $30,000 a year. But the shortage of housing and the lack of rental availability, we've been in sort of a tight market since about 2014 for rental housing. We've seen a 46% increase in market rate rents in just a 5-year period. And almost 3/4 of renter households that earn less than $50,000 a year are currently cost burdened, so paying more than 30% of their gross income for housing. We're also trying to work on these other issues like high cost of commercial and workspaces. There's a high number of self-employed people, a lot of people in the creative industries, entrepreneurs, and so trying to address that need at the same time as addressing affordable housing needs. So really thinking about, where do economic development and affordable housing intersect? And then there's a neighborhood level where the Siler corridor is a transitioning neighborhood. It was once the far edge of town, and the site that we are going to build on was once actually the location of the city's sewer treatment plant, which was decommissioned in the 80s. So you can imagine, one time this was the far edge of town, but urban growth and what I would, a little bit of sprawl growth on the south side of town, I would say, has made this in the center of the city, and so it's under a lot of development pressures. And then, like I said, really the idea here is attempting to leverage affordable housing resources and economic development resources to create a housing intervention that really impacts both those areas. So this is an overview rendering of the project. That road shown to the right is Siler Road, if you're familiar with Santa Fe. The large buildings at the southern edge of the property there are the Food Depot and Kitchen Angels, if you're familiar with that. But the project consists of 65 units of live-work units, and we specifically program those for 1 to 3 bedroom units. We heard a lot of feedback in community outreach that this project should serve families, and particularly intergenerational families. So that was an important part of the process. We have a design that is really designed around an in-unit workspace, and it's a flexible, open concept for living room, kitchen, and workspace that can sort of be used as needed by the individual renting it. And it's 100% affordable housing for folks under 60% of median income. There's a gradient of different income levels within that go down to about $422 a month all utilities included. Kind of the idea of this also is that the housing is co-located with a community makerspace, which will be operated by Make Santa Fe, which is a membership-based makerspace here in Santa Fe. For those of you not familiar, makerspaces are a growing movement around the country focused on giving normal folks access to high technology tools, expensive things like 3D printers, 3D controlled or computer controlled laser cutters, equipment such as that folks can access. So the idea at the core of this project is being able to provide people with low cost living and working space, being co-located with a makerspace that gives them access to tools, equipment, meeting space, working space, classroom space, as well as a suite of sort of economic development programming that seeks to amplify all those resources for the folks that are living there. One of the things that I'm really proud of that we're able to do in this project is achieve essentially a net zero operation. Basically, we've spec'd these apartments to all have very high efficiency HVAC and hot water heaters, and anticipate being able to offset the entire consumption from the residential project with solar panels located on the roofs of the buildings. So this will be one of the, if not the first net zero multifamily project, definitely the first net zero affordable multifamily project in New Mexico. And so a little bit about that. So, basically what we've done here is started with the roof area that we had in terms of, ability to house solar panels and work backwards, because in affordable housing, we have a lot of cost controls. We have a lot of incentive from the funding programs to use as little funding as possible. In this case, we were going to have to raise money for some gap financing anyway, because these units are more expensive than a lot of, sort of a standard affordable housing unit. And because the development costs in Santa Fe are higher than the rest of the state, we had to raise some money. And it was actually the realization that if we raised money for solar panels, one of the things we'd be doing is growing the amount of people who are interested in potentially providing this gap funding. But from a financing point of view, the solar panels actually reduce our operations costs on the back end and really boost our mortgage yield. And so that had the same effect as essentially just gapping the subsidy funds and asking for less subsidy, which allows us to max out the points categories in the subsidy awards. But so there's a lot of innovative stuff. Obviously, this isn't the most bleeding edge of sustainable development, but trying to push the limits of what we can do with affordable housing and the restrictions that affordable housing funding sources have around costs. So here's a little overview of the funding. The just like slight stab in the gut and all this is actually the development budget's $18.5 million now, just between the time we applied and actually moving towards construction. There's a number of cost increases we've experienced. But the way this breaks down is the majority of the funding, it comes from the low-income housing tax credit program. That's a funding program through the U.S. Treasury, which is managed by the Mortgage Finance Authority. The way this funding source works is highly competitive. Typically around 250 units of new construction affordable rental housing are awarded statewide annually. So think about that in the context of Santa Fe needing thousands of these units. It's like I said, a very competitive process that uses a scoring methodology. And one of the big pieces of us being able to score competitively was having what at the beginning of this process, the MFA called a local match or a local contribution that helps boost your scoring. And really the only way for us to do that in Santa Fe, being like most of northern New Mexico, land rich and cash poor, was to be able to donate land to the project. And so we actually worked hand in hand with the city over a multi-year process starting in 2014 to assess sites and actually arrive at this potential development site. We've got a runaway slide presentation here. But it took us 3 tries, partly, you know, in the sense that this has been a really unstable time for affordable housing, particularly low-income housing tax credits. The changes to the federal tax code had a really devastating effect on the value of these tax credits. And but the cities, in this case, is contributing the value of the land, $400,000 in infrastructure funding, as well as what's statutorily available, which is permit and fee waivers, which in Santa Fe on a multifamily project of this scale are in the neighborhood of $600,000. So that allows us to show leverage and local buy-in from our local government. The rest of the money, the bulk of the rest of the money comes from a HUD mortgage, $5.25 million. And there you see the $750,000 in private donations, which we secured about $365,000 in commitments locally. One of the important things to note there that we're actually leveraging a highly underutilized source, which is the New Mexico State Affordable Housing Tax Credit. And that's one of the ways that we've been able to be really successful in raising local contributions for the project. Typically, there's not a really well-developed philanthropic community focused on affordable housing, partly because the scales of funding needed are so big and it's hard for smaller foundations to participate in or corporate giving programs. But in New Mexico, we have this unique tool called a state affordable housing tax credit, which actually gives donors to qualifying affordable housing projects 50 cents on the dollar in a state tax rebate, essentially, for their contribution. So if someone contributes a $10,000 gift to the project, they actually get $5,000 back in state tax credits, which can be applied towards payroll taxes and income taxes and compensating taxes over a multi-year period. So this has been really successful for us to go to especially larger corporations who have established giving programs and explain to them that if you give to this project, you can either get half of your donation back, or you can extend your donation by 100% essentially. If you want to try and donate those back to the project. So we actually use that as a source. The other thing to note is that in the solar panels, in this case, the $750,000 solar panel installation is eligible for a 30% federal tax credit. So we actually get about $200,000 in solar tax credit equity. That is one of the sources in this project and help make things work overall. Just sort of a important understanding of how this sort of impacts individual families' lives. When we compare the rents in this project to even just conservative estimates of HUD fair market rents for Santa Fe, that average savings is about $3,500, not a month, a year for each family living in the project. So that's a huge economic impact for lower income families to just have more disposable income on top of all these other benefits. And then because New Mexico, in what I would say a regressive way, charges gross receipts tax on affordable housing construction, we will actually pay about $1 million in gross receipts tax as part of this construction. So that's an additional benefit to state and local governments, not to mention the GRT generation ongoing from many self-employed residents who are supported by the project.
And if I could just add a couple of things from the city's perspective on this. One of the things that's challenging for anyone who's listening who either works for a local municipality or is an elected official, this really requires changing a mindset, because we're very used to governments providing safety net services or providing basic services that nobody else can provide, like police protection, water utilities, plowing the roads, managing the parks, that kind of thing. And so I continually, over these many years of working on this project in particular, had to work with my governing body to change their mindset from, no, it's not that we're spending all this money per unit. We had one city councilor who loved to point out that it was $30,000 per unit. That's insane. What we're doing is it's an investment, and really trying to change that. So look at for the value of the contributions that the city's making, and only $400,000 of that is actual cash. And like most municipalities, we don't have extra buckets of cash around. So we were really able to look at what is an underused resource, this piece of land that has piles of cinders and some public works and some parks storage stuff on it. But let's take that underused land and then leverage, as Daniel showed in his slide, an 8-to-1 investment ratio, which if you're looking at it from the perspective of an investment, that's huge, right? So if anyone listening would like more thoughts on this and kind of how to change the mindset, how to change the perception, kind of the marketing aspect of using public resources for affordable housing, please contact me. You can find me through the City of Santa Fe's website, and I'd be happy to kind of talk you through what was helpful. Well, I'll say some of the mistakes I made early on, and then what was helpful in kind of shifting that reluctance to invest in a specific project because it felt like a giveaway, changing that kind of perspective to this idea of, no, look at all of the other resources you're leveraging for your community because of this.
Okay, great. Well, I think, yeah, one of the points here is about changing sort of austerity mindsets that a lot of local governments have. There was one city councilor who I won't name by name, but am giving an evil eye right now, who repeatedly said things like, well, we're giving you $30,000 per unit. This isn't sustainable. From any other perspective, that you could create a long-term income restricted affordable unit for just $30,000 would be like an amazing thing, because frankly, they cost us over $200,000 a piece to produce, right? So really shifting the mindset around these types of investments actually fix structural problems in communities. They lead to huge investment, not just in construction, but like the ongoing benefits that we talked about in terms of more disposable income for families. In this case, the economic development impacts of growing local businesses. And so this is like actually these types of investments in affordable housing, even things, non-cash investments like donations of land, are incredibly, they lead to broad prosperity in communities, honestly. That's the most, it sounds lofty, but that's the basic of it. And I think in this case, like another thing to just note, like it's really important if you're a local government and you're listening to this, or you represent a local government or another public entity, reach out to MFA, reach out to people like Alexandra who can sort of tell you how the process works. One of the most burdensome things about being able to take advantage of the Affordable Housing Act exemption to the any donation clause is that you do have to have an affordable housing plan, which is dictated by state law and kind of a cumbersome document to produce. And costly typically. So, and MFA actually has an RFP for cost sharing on these. They sometimes pay up to 50% of the cost to produce these plans, but to be able to donate land or any other sort of resources to affordable housing, it would require having a plan in place. So that's always the first step, and MFA has some great staff that can help support local governments through the process of getting those plans and ordinances in place that allow for this type of donation. And this page just talks a little bit more about how challenging the low-income housing tax credit project process is and how competitive it is. They're often getting at least 2.5 to 1 requests for the funding they have in a given year. It's the amount of funding is allocated by formula of population. So states like New Mexico with relatively low populations do not have big allocations of this funding. And so it's really important. In most cases, you want to work with an experienced tax credit developer, typically a nonprofit developer, who can sort of work hand in hand with you in designing a process. And per state law, you want to go through proper procurement channels. Typically, an RFP would be used to select a developer to work with. And then typically the way this works is, in many cases, the nonprofit developers are if you've got a project that looks like it will score competitively in the statewide race for these funds, we often as developers will take on a lot of the front end speculative costs. The applications are only accepted once a year, so very high stakes and very costly. Typically, these applications can cost upwards of $40,000 to produce in terms of staff time and consultants and third-party reports and architectural designs and other feasibility work. So it's certainly something that you want to make sure that you have a competitive project before you enter into this process, because it is, like I said, high stakes and very costly to apply for.
All right, thanks, Alexandra and Daniel. That was great. And so much is compacted into a few minutes, so I hope you all can follow up with them. So I want to introduce our next panelists from the New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority, and that's Sean Colbert and Kevin Drexel. And I have a little bit of bio about Kevin, and sorry, Sean, I didn't get a bio, but Kevin is the Assistant Director of the Housing Development at New Mexico Mortgage Finance Authority with over 20 years of experience in affordable housing, project development, and real estate investment analysis. He has worked with local community-based housing development corporations and national developers of affordable housing using public and private sources of financing, including the low-income housing tax credits, tax-exempt bonds, historic tax credits, all to develop new construction and historic adapted reuse projects. So, Sean, Kevin, want to take it away?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you. This is Sean Colbert, and I don't know what happened. I think as I may be having some technical difficulties with my emails and things disappearing. So just briefly, if I can just add, as Director of Housing Development, then the multifamily funding programs for the state come up through our department, and I lead that department, and Kevin is our Assistant Director of Housing Development. And I've been with MFA for about 3 years. But prior to that, I developed affordable housing in Pennsylvania for about 20 years, concentrating in senior affordable housing. So I come from a development background, not as much a financing background, before I came over to this side of the table.
Thanks for adding that, Sean.
Oops. What happened here? We're having a little bit of challenge here. The presentation just disappeared. Are you seeing it on your end? All right, let me try the...
Yes, yeah, we see it. And if you...
We have it, Kevin got it back, but the buttons aren't working. I think we have a gremlin in our building this morning. It was working, there we go. It was working before we started here this morning. Okay, my apologies. Let's try again. So here's what we'll be covering briefly, and Daniel did a good job of giving some information on some of our programs, so a little bit might be duplicative, but we'll power through. So who is MFA? So we were created in 1975 to distribute low interest rate mortgages, and we became the state's designating housing agency in 1997. So that brought all the state's housing departments together. We're quasi-governmental, which basically means we are self-supporting, and while some of our programs receive state funds, our operations do not. We don't get any money off the state budget for operations. So we have to earn our keep with program income mostly. We provide resources for rehabilitation, new construction, down payment assistance and mortgages, as well as funding things like emergency shelters and providing some rental assistance. We also oversee compliance for all the funds that we allocate. So we'll start with an overview of our big gorilla, the low-income housing tax credit program that Daniel utilized in building Siler. The low-income housing tax credit program was started in 1986 by the IRS and is administered by the Treasury, and housing credit agencies were designated by each state to manage the allocation of credits. What's happening here? I guess the runaway Went away. PowerPoint again. Okay. Okay, let me try using just the arrows here. My apologies, folks. So there are two types of credits available, the 9% and the 4%. The 4% are as of right, so they're non-competitive, and then the 9% credits, which are highly competitive. As Daniel mentioned, they're allocated to states based on population, so New Mexico gets between $5 and $6 million in 9% credits annually. For both, the credits are awarded to developers and then sold to investors who receive a dollar-for-dollar tax reduction over 10 years. Because this is equity and not debt, it reduces the debt on the property and allows for lower rent. So QAP stands for the Qualified Allocation Plan, and that's kind of the Bible of our program. And it's what states have to lay out how they're going to award the credits based on certain priorities. Generally, the QAP must accomplish three things. It must set the project selection criteria, give preference to those serving the lowest income residents for the longest period of time, and provide a procedure for monitoring compliance. Beyond that, MFA has broad discretion to make the QAP reflect their housing priorities. By IRS code, projects have three choices for income levels that they choose to serve, or area median incomes. One is they must have at least 20% of the units set aside for households at or below 50% of area median income, or AMI. The rest can be unrestricted or market rate. At least 40% of the units set aside for households at or below 60% AMI, or the newest set aside that was just established in 2018 that allows for residents up to 80% AMI if at least 40% of the total units are restricted, and the average income at the project is at or below 60%. So every tax credit project must serve one of those three set-asides. There are some things that the IRS requires in a QAP. For example, the population the property will serve, where the property is located, energy efficiency is another one. And it must address these criteria, but it may address more criteria. For example, in addition to special needs in households with children that require by code to be served, we also prioritize properties that serve seniors. So these are some of the priorities in our current QAP, and these are ultimately approved by our board of directors and signed off on by the governor. And this list includes both code required and state directed priorities. So we'll walk through the tax credit process. It works on principle that investors will pay to offset their tax liability by buying credits from the awarded projects. So the first step is figuring out which projects should be awarded tax credits, which is done through the priorities and processes found in the QAP. Once awards are made, projects sell their awarded credits to investors. Sometimes the investors are identified through a syndicator, sometimes they're sold directly to a bank looking to fulfill Community Reinvestment Act requirements or other investors. The credits are allocated over 10 years, so the true credit sold is 10 times the award amount. So in this example, the award was for $1 million in credits, but over 10 years, that translates into $10 million in credit. Pricing varies just like any investment, but for this example, the credits are sold for 90 cents per credit, so that $1 million award creates $9 million in capital equity for the project. With the QAP process, the developer makes certain promises about the use of the property, including the income levels of the residents and any populations they promise to serve. So while the credits are given out and taken over a 10-year period, the IRS can recapture them for the first 15 years if the owner doesn't keep the promises that they made. So the investor has a very vested interest in making sure that the project is in full compliance over that initial period, and of course, MFA oversees the operations of the project for the 30 or plus years. So following that, there's an extended use compliance period that's at least 15 years. but can be more as required some years under MFA's QAP. So just briefly on the market rate versus affordable development question, it's not a straight apples to apples comparison when you're looking at market rate and affordable apartment communities. So as you can see on the slide, while the actual hard costs are somewhat similar, affordable projects often have a more restrictive construction scope and many soft costs that market rate projects just don't have. A market rate project is structured to generate cash flow as rents increase and properties appreciate over time to generate a gain at disposition. Since restricted rents also restrict cash flow and the long-term affordability inhibits appreciation, it's a different animal for affordable properties at disposition time. So this is the 9% LIHTC award process, and I just have some calendar highlights up there. You can see down the bottom is our website, and again, this will be on the YouTube, and I believe Joanna said we'll be sending out the slides, so you'll have that information in front of you, but that website link will take you to the calendar. So the award process begins in February this year when applications are due. That's going to move back to January next year because we're bumping the cycle up by 1 month. They're all reviewed thoroughly by staff from both asset management and housing development. We make preliminary awards, and then there's an appeal period. Our board approves the awards in June, and then we send the final reservation letters. After that, there are more requirements to secure the award, but we're not going to cover that today. I should point out that we have a QAP training every year, and this year it was in November, and you must attend that training to submit an application in the competitive round. But the 4% non-competitive applications have an alternate training mechanism, so those can be taken year-round. Our next QA training will be in October 2020, so mark your calendars for that if you're interested in participating in next year's 9% round. So that's the nutshell on the 9% credit, and now we'll take a quick look at the 4% tax credit. This is a 4-hour presentation that we condensed into 15 minutes, so we won't spend a lot of time on the 4% credits, but I did want to give you just a few points. The 4% credits are used in conjunction with tax-exempt bonds, and the state allocates bond cap to MFA annually. We just got our allocation for 2020, and it's over $200 million in tax-exempt bond cap that we have to work with. And affordable housing is one of the few uses in the state for those bonds, that bond cap. So we use it to fund our mortgages, and we also use it to fund our multifamily 4% deals. The 4% are not subject to the tax credit competitive round, but they still must follow the QAP. And as I mentioned, it's a rolling application cycle, so we take those at any time of the year. There's also such a thing as a 4% acquisition credit, and that is used exclusively when an owner purchases an existing building for substantial rehab purposes. The credits here are based on the cost of acquiring the building, and the rest of the cost may be eligible for 9% credits. So, and as with all 4 9% credits, the low income percentage of the cost can be used in allocating the tax credits. If it's not for the low income residents, then you can't pay for it in tax credits, which creates a gap. So just a quick comparison of the 9% versus the 4%. So let's look at a project that has an $11,400,000 total development cost. Usually that will cover 70% of the total development cost. So that's your LIHTC equity, and then debt, and we'll talk about that farther along in the presentation, covers the rest of it. And 4% generally covers, tax credits generally cover 30% of the total development cost. So you have a bigger gap that needs to be filled with debt and other sources like grants or general partner contributions. So how do you fill those gaps? Well, as Daniel mentioned in his presentation, one way is with our New Mexico affordable housing tax credit that we just call our state tax credit. And that was signed into law in 2015. The slide's a little wonky. And it goes to eligible individuals and businesses for donations to eligible housing projects. Or we also have a charitable trust that we administer that was established specifically to receive these donations. And the donations can include land, buildings, cash, or services, and the credit is equal to 50% of the donation value. So a $2,000 donation equals a $1,000 state tax credit. Also awarded on a per capita basis, and we had about 4.7 million in state tax credits for 2019. So we have quite a bit of money in that fund as well. And we're excited to see developers like Daniel starting to take advantage for that for multifamily projects. It's not that old of a project, and has been used traditionally. A lot of the habitats, since they live and breathe donations, have been very successful with it, but we're really excited that multifamily developers are figuring out how it can benefit their projects as well. So again, the activities include things like acquisitions, new construction, and or rehab for eligible projects, and they can be single family or multifamily. And the maximum award per project is 25% of the credits available in any given year. And when a project is approved, we issue an award letter, a reservation letter, and then the project applicant uses that to solicit donations, and then we issue investment vouchers once we have proof of the donation, and the donor uses that voucher when they file their taxes. And this donation often qualifies for a federal tax credit as well, so you get more bang for your buck. In many cases, you can get a combined credit of up to 90% of your donation. As always, please see your tax advisor for more information on your particular circumstance. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, and he's going to talk to you more about options for that gap financing.
Thank you, Sean. This is Kevin Drexel. I'm the Assistant Director of Housing Development at MSA, the Mortgage Finance Authority. First slide I have here is talks about the Affordable Housing Act. I think the other presenters have talked about that. I don't know how much more I need to go over that, except that it really is state enabling legislation that allows counties and municipalities to actually donate land, cash, or waive fees to support affordable housing projects. MSA is kind of the compliance organization that ensures and certifies local jurisdictions. They certify their housing plans to make sure they're in compliance with the act. But it is a source, as other presenters have talked about. There's really, I guess, when you look at affordable housing projects, or actually any project, real estate development project, there's two ways to finance it. There's owner equity, investor equity, cash, and then there's bank debt that has to be paid back. In more simplistic terms, it's sometimes easy to think about the whole development process in some ways in like a 3-year cycle. A year of kind of planning, sizing up a deal, looking for a site. Another year kind of working with your investors and banks to kind of close the deals and do all the due diligence and underwriting. And another year to construct it. So along that entire process, the developer is going to have some costs. At the pre-development stage, which is probably the riskiest stage, is the earliest stage where you need to have some cash available to finance and maybe acquisition, purchase of a site or building. You're going to spend some money on legal costs. You're going to have some architectural costs. It's seen as probably the riskiest part of the process. Depending on the size of your project, you may need just a few $1,000s, or in larger projects, you can run up the tabs of over $2 million before you even start construction. So there are people who do fund that. Developers use their own cash in it, but you need to make sure you plan for that entire process to have that kind of cash available to get it going. MFA is kind of we sometimes call ourselves a gap lender, meaning that we are kind of working with or behind or next to other banks and investors it can be Citibank, Bank of America, PNC, whatever. But we do provide financing in the different stages of the project. Our Primero Investment Fund it provides some construction lending. We generally can't handle large deals on our own with Primero, but we sometimes have cheaper money, lower interest rate money that is blended with traditional bank money to help the project out. So sometimes we'll kind of come in next to a large lender. We do have the New Mexico Housing Trust Fund, which is a state appropriated fund that MFA manages. We can lend money during construction and also keep money in a deal at the permanent stage as well. At this point, we can lend up to $1.5 million during construction, but then it has to be paid down at the permanent side to $500,000. There are different sources for both construction and permanent. Sometimes they're the same. A lender will come in, provide construction financing, and also stay in the deal on the permanent side. Sometimes they're different entities. It just depends how you carve out the project. Sean talked about tax-exempt bonds. We are a bond issuer. The issuance of the bonds have to be sold on Wall Street. Usually see this on large deals. The transaction costs are high because it's actually a very complicated process. So you do have significant legal fees, transaction fees. So you're generally seeing bonds used in projects of 100, 200 units, not smaller deals. MFA is also what we call a 542C risk share lender. That's a HUD program. And we also work with USDA on Section 538. These are what we call credit enhancements. They're not direct loans, but they enhance investor loans. Sometimes these loans are provided by outside investors. In some cases, also MFA actually uses its own cash on its balance sheet to make some smaller loans that are insured by 542C and USDA. We have the National Housing Trust Fund, which is a federal appropriation, and I believe right now our allocation in New Mexico is about $3 million. That is restricted to extremely low income or very low income individuals at 30% AMI or less. But it is a source. It's a gap source. We see it in tax credit deals. Sometimes we see it as a standalone funding source for homeless or permanent supportive housing type projects. And then all those sources, again, can be used during construction, and some of them can also stay in the deal on the permanent financing end. On the equity side, we do allocate tax credits. I won't talk too much about that because other presenters have talked a lot about that. The credit, again, is not actually an allocation of money. It's an allocation of a credit that then needs to be sold to investors. You can do what they call direct placement to investors and banks, which will buy the credits. They use it to offset their federal tax liability. You can also work with kind of syndicators or brokers of credits to monetize that credit, but it's not an allocation of money directly that has to be monetized through syndication and sale. Again, we talked about the affordable housing tax credit as well. Developer funds, we do see that. There are some developers who will put in some of their own cash in the deal to make these deals work. County or municipal contributions, we've talked about that through the Affordable Housing Act. And then there's other developers will chase after other grants and organizational funds. So these deals can be complex, and it's not uncommon to see 5, 6, 7, 8 sources layered in a deal, all at different terms, but all are necessary to make a deal work. This is just a slide. I'll just point you to the URL down the bottom to get more information. It's not readable, but this basically kind of goes over some of our programs, our different lending programs that I mentioned earlier for pre-development, construction, and permanent financing. They all have different terms, different caps on them, different rates, but you should basically, if you're interested, and I'll get to the other slide, come talk with us. So we do have an application process, and if you want to go to our website, look under the, go to the main page and then look for developers. Then you can click on developers and you can click on things like the tax credit program, which is shown here. That'll then take you to the other page, which will lead you to kind of the application documents that we have listed here. Some are just Word docs, some are Excel spreadsheets, some are in a zip file that you can download. And here's a list that it'll take you. It looks kind of daunting, and I guess it is at times.
For us too.
Yes, for everyone involved. But we keep these updated, and you can download those directly. There's also, if you're looking, the other program we manage, among the others I mentioned, is the Home Investment Partnership Program. That's a federal program, and it's gap money that we use. And if you can click on that after you go to the rental development page, and that'll take you again to the application, our checklist, and the documents that you need. I think what I'll emphasize here is this is our housing development team. We probably mostly do multifamily rental development, but we do some single-family homeownership development. We're allowed to do that, and we do see that. I think what I'll emphasize is in the beginning of the process, come talk to us. Reach out to Sean or me or anyone here that you see on the list, and we can help you navigate to the program that's going to work best for you. I think it works when a developer, especially if they're new in the process, has an idea and they're trying to figure out how to fund it. We can talk to you and help you think through it and kind of guide you through our maze of different programs. And very often developers are using multiple pages or multiple funding sources from us along the way.
There is a contact there too for the affordable housing plan process. That's not technically a housing development endeavor, so you would want to contact Rebecca Velarde for further information on that. But any of the other loan programs and the financing, we can help you with. And we also have our tribal liaisons contact up there and our person that handles our HUD regulations, environmental reviews and such.
So I guess that concludes MFA's portion of it, and I guess I'll turn it over to the moderators.
Great. Thank you, Sean. Thanks, Kevin. That was great. We're going to power through, and we're getting some good questions, so keep them coming, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. So I want to introduce Edie Dillman and Jonah Stanford, and they are going to be offering the perspective of a private company and explore the work that they're doing with BPublic. And a little bit of background about Edie and Jonah. Edie leads the business development and sales as CEO and co-founder of BPublic. Most recently, she served as director of strategy and communication for the national nonprofit Innovate Educate, that works to transform the education to workforce system. And Jonah is CTO and co-founder of BPublic, as well as the principal at NMEDD Inc., based in Santa Fe. The firm is recognized as an industry leader in resilient high-performance building design, earned through advanced knowledge and demonstrated by the successful completion of projects. And from lead to lead for homes pilot projects to the first generation of Passivus consultants trained in North America, Jonah's passion has been the advancement of socially equitable housing solutions for the underserved. So, Edie, Jonah, you guys take it away.
Hi there. Can you guys hear us just fine? And I'm taking control of the slide deck. Let's see if I can move it forward. So again, I'm Edie Dillman, and I'm sitting here next to Jonah Stanford. And we're going to switch a little bit. We're obviously non-governmental. We're a new company based in Santa Fe, and we're here to empower the private sector with tools for individuals and developers to build differently, design differently, and reduce use specifically around materials and energy, but exceed expectations. So for the sake of this section, we're going to try and avoid words like green and efficient and sustainable, and sort of leapfrog into solutions that are for housing that are high performance and prefabricated. So moving us down, let's see if I can get this to go to the next slide. Nope. There we go. Recently founded last year and coming to market. So you can see Jonah there, and I'm in the middle. And then our third partner, Charlotte Lagarde, should be online and listening as well. I don't think I'm going to stick there and move forward. So we're going to go through some of the information about our company that we think is important to add here as a different perspective to the housing conversation. We're here to talk about our approach, and our approach comes specifically to see meaningful change and rapid response in the housing need here in New Mexico and throughout the US. A lot of what we've heard this morning from the city of Santa Fe, from Daniel, and from MFA, there is a clear need, and that need is not just in New Mexico, it is across the country. And we really come to it from a solutions-based. As Joanna mentioned in my bio, I come from the question around skills and training, and certainly around the building trades. We have many issues, but one of which is training people quickly into these new systems and innovations, and building more quickly. So we're here to offer a solution to the building trades, but also partner with. So we work directly with local builders to build these high efficiency homes. So we're not replacing or displacing local contractors. We're really offering a new tool to them. So this is what we do. We design and sell fast, smart, beautiful homes that utilize a prefabricated system that we have created. And so our prefabricated building envelope components go direct to builders, architects, and designers to work with. So we're here to support better buildings and solutions to housing needs. So New Mexico has a long history of being adaptable and building green and having strategies that are appropriate for the time and for the materials around us. And we're just adding to that tradition and trying to innovate to ensure that we have great housing stock and quality buildings going forward. So it's interesting that you see that we have both a mission and a vision. We are a public benefit corp, which for those of you who don't know, this is a new corporation where we have a triple bottom line. So we are both fiscally responsible to our shareholders, but we are also here to really make a change in how affordable homes specifically will be built, and with less impact on the environment. And using as much as we can local manufacturing and installing in a reasonable development and with flexibility and speed. Where I began, we're really offering solutions to the private sectors, to individuals, and to developers to do things a little bit differently and adopt greener solutions. So this is one of my favorite slides. Why are we building homes that burn fuel like a 1966 Camaro versus a 2020 Tesla? So I know it's a strange reference, but apparently the 1966 Camaro had the worst efficiency in miles per gallon. And we talk a lot about cars and efficiency, but on the scale about where our carbon emissions come from, 40% of those are coming from buildings compared to 23% that's coming from transportation. And everyone has a really good idea about what an efficient vehicle looks like, but we talk less about what the carbon footprint of homes are and their energy use. So the system that we've designed is based on the Passive House Institute standard. And this is a certification that results in an energy reduction of 80 to 90% of energy for the use of, for the life of that building. So Jonah's been designing homes to this standard for 10 years and has developed this predictable high performance prefab envelope for use for anyone. So we know what we build and how we build and what we consume makes a big impact. And when we say how we build, we mean in prefabricated wall sections that are put together on site like Lego building blocks. We believe that to be responsive and innovative in the market today, we must adopt a faster way to build and better building practices. So prefabricated walls can be built in a controlled workshop and quickly installed on site, which reduces loss and the volatility of things like weather that we can't control. So quickly out of the ground and weathered in is simply smart. And market analysis generally reflects the 20% reduction in costs and 40% increased speed in construction. So the US has made some great strides towards prefabrication and the use of modular. But in research from 2016, only 2% of new homes being built incorporated any kind of modular prefab. It's certainly getting better. There's more adoption, but we're certainly far, far behind the countries that are leading, like Sweden, Japan, and Germany.
I'll step in here a little bit that, you know, when we were, this is Jonah Stanford, when we were looking at developing the system, you know, initially it was really intended to be to streamline the design and bidding sort of more volatile and risky aspects of the development process. Just as our construction costs were really volatile, as we've seen over the last, you know, 5 years of changing, you know, upwards between like 10 and 15% a year, and really having a pretty big impact on the predictability of our construction process. And we, you know, and so really wanting it to be a very viable housing solution and a flexible one, as Edie was talking about. That one of the things that was really important to us in developing it, though, was that we didn't want, like we really felt strongly that any housing solution that we developed had to simultaneously address a lot of our our environmental requirements that our communities are facing now as well. And so, excuse me, all the systems that we've developed, primarily in the thermal envelope and the structure of the building, are all using natural materials for the most part, and a huge portion of that by volume is carbon sequestering compared to you know, highly refined materials or that have a significant carbon impact, so that our construction itself can be carbon sequestering opposed to liability moving forward, which feels, you know, really important to us if we want to develop really long-term solutions. One of the interesting aspects of the Passive House approach to construction in general is it basically it really is investing in a conservation of energy, which comes from a knowledge of the natural materials characteristics and physics as well, so that once we really align our buildings and our construction methodology in that direction and optimize how much energy conservation can be achieved, then it really shows that it really results in reduced reliance on highly mechanical systems, which of course are obsolete fairly quickly in our communities, and as well as requiring quite a bit of maintenance, where if we can move to a more passive construction, that's an amazingly resilient and long-term stable performance.
Well, and I'll jump in here because I love this slide. And passive house is obviously a very technical building science, but when you think of it, it is a highly insulated building envelope. So for those of us in New Mexico who love our deep set windows, these walls are 15 inches with deep set windows, but those windows are 3-pane windows. So the quality of the construction, the craftsmanship, really is in that envelope, and why we reference physics rather than systems in how this works. So I'll push it forward. This next slide is a nice demonstration of, like, when we're talking about how green this system is and where it sort of falls in this continuum. Jonah, you can talk about where we're at, but with net zero homes all the way at the left, and a typical existing home up on the right, up to 150s on the HERS home energy index.
Yeah, and I think this is important just because that 100 mark, and this is pretty subjective by every community's code and so forth, but the 2009 IECC code is that 100 mark, and it's important to note that code construction is not a building guideline or best practice intentions. It's really a benchmark to establish where anything less than that is against the law. And I think it's important for all of us to understand that you can achieve quite a bit more just through your construction approach and so forth without increasing the sophistication of your building systems, just by being conscientious about how things are detailed and through just the thermal envelope itself. And so it's just we do feel that we suffer from fairly, as a culture in general, like fairly chronic low expectations in our buildings in terms of performance and comfort and cost of maintaining them and utility use. And it's one thing that we're really trying to educate the communities about, is how far you can take just a very passive, stable approach to sustainable construction.
Yeah, and of course, based on the conversation we've been having this morning, when you think of investment long-term on affordable housing or workforce housing or any housing, is putting the most investment into the building itself, into the mortgage rather than utilities and other things that really add value to the homeowner or the renter, for that matter. So there's some, there we go. So obviously when you're talking about prefabrication, there's a period of time where the walls themselves, the system itself, is in construction, in a workshop, in a factory, where you can't overlap the construction on site, where you'd be doing site work while other things are being done. Go ahead, Joe.
So, typically, prefab construction has shown that it's reducing your on-site construction time by 30 to 40%, and that's I think it's important, certainly, that we all understand that during that construction period is one of our highest risk portions of time. One, our money is the most expensive during those construction periods. It's also where all of our, our materials are exposed to the weather, and just relatively high risk. There's a lot of moving parts. And what we really see as a significant benefit to the prefabrication approach is really from a risk reduction perspective. And so that's definitely playing out in the construction time itself. I think, another aspect that BPublic is really serving, though, is because we've established a lot of it's a component-based design process, that we're really actually reducing the time that it's requiring to go through the design and pricing process or bidding process, so that very quickly at the beginning of the process, we can generate designs using the components. And since it's all unit pricing, all those components can have established prices, so we can generate very accurate preliminary pricing very early in on the project, so that we can hone in on the project budget very efficiently. Again, this is, I think we touched on this slide a little bit earlier, but just in general, just through conservation alone, this is not through additional systems or anything like that, but BPublic construction really does represent, just period, an 80 to 90% reduction in energy use, period. There's a lot of, positive impacts to that from a municipal level as well as the end user level, just in terms of resource management and infrastructure. And it's really what we see it as, just it's the shortest distance between new construction and achieving site net zero, which is through on-site generation.
Yeah, and we've had some great conversations in the state around this, specifically that we are moving to renewables, and that's an amazing and the right movement. But the best thing we can do is reduce our need before we get to that need for generation. So this is even more progressive way to start addressing our energy use and requirements here and everywhere. So we're very excited to share this piece out because it is unique. So our system is ideal for infill projects. Jonah just mentioned about the infrastructure needs for housing and development because there is a reduced energy need and utilities need. This is great for infill. It is also prefabricated and goes up easily and quickly onto a site. So in terms of doing things like casitas and studios on existing properties, it's a great solution. It is also, just as applicable to multifamily developments. It is a Lego-like system that you can design as needed. That means you can also use it appropriately, where we don't need to sort of build the biggest possible, but build appropriately for what that client, that community, or that developer needs in terms of size and shape of buildings.
I think, one of the couple of our other colleagues that presented today are talking about different incentives that are out there, or tools that can be leveraged for that successful implementation. And so like there's also the sustainable state tax credit that is available for residential and commercial construction, and that is something that all of our buildings do comply with at the highest levels. It's people can go on the state website for reference there. We should have provided it here. I think that probably would have been helpful, but that that can be, I believe it's around $6 per square foot for residential construction that that a project can be eligible for. And that can be really, as we all know, really sort of the tipping point that can turn a project.
So we've talked about the speed at which and thoughtfulness of prefab. We've also talked about sort of the green qualities of the materials that we use, and then the energy use. But there are a ton, and this is we could go on for a couple hours too, like Kevin and Sean about this, but that there are additional benefits to these homes. And I want to reiterate, these are, craftsman-made homes. It's to the European standard of green. And so there are additional benefits to living and having a home built this way. It is electric only, so there is not the additional need for gas to power these homes. So the infrastructure is reduced. It also has a fresh air exchange, so there is a quality of air in it. Jonah, you can jump in too.
Yeah, I mean, the indoor air quality is extremely high. That comes, as a response to the lack of VOCs being used in the construction materials themselves, and then also through some assured ventilation. Also, as we just look and we move to higher density and infill and ADUs and so forth, I think just a quality of life in terms of comfort and acoustic isolation, I think, are all really important. We need to be able to move our housing in a direction where we can have multiple family and still have very sense of privacy through acoustics and comfort. And all of those, they're basically residual benefits of living in a higher efficiency building, which is coming from higher insulation values and natural materials as well. So,
and I did want to mention that the orientation of these buildings is flexible, so you can be responsive to a site and how it's designed, and that too adds to being able to put multiple family together on a site and be appropriate to the site. It's also, stackable and quiet. And as we like to say, it is the right thing to do as we consider the housing needs that are great and what's happening with our climate. That it's nice to share with you guys good news. There are solutions. There are other great things happening and coming to market. And we're here to continue this conversation, and please reach out. We are looking for people to partner with people who want to build with us, people who want to help us grow and train more people in green building. So thank you, and we'll stop there and go to Joanna.
All right, thanks, Edie. Thanks, Jonah. As mentioned, really good perspective of kind of the private industry, the commercial industry side of it, from developers that are trying to do interesting things around sustainability and housing development projects. So let's move on. We're kind of pushing up against our time limit here. Let me advance the slides. There's me. And as I mentioned, I'm with New Mexico Economic Development Department. I'm on the development finance team. So dealing with all things finance, how do we talk about funding some of these projects? I'm not going to go into some of these entities because our panelists did a pretty good job they did an excellent job, not pretty good, job at explaining the programs that they are administrating. And I put some additional links if you want to follow up and explore some of these on your own. USDA, obviously, if you're in a rural area, this can be a really great partner to look at funding some of your projects. HUD was already mentioned. The Federal Home Loan Bank, I don't think was mentioned, but they are lending more toward banks. But you could reach out to them. I know they have a couple of small grants that are available. Opportunity zones. I know we've already gotten some questions about opportunity zones. This is a really exciting way that you could look at funding some housing development projects. We have 63 opportunity zone tracks in New Mexico. So one of the first things that you could do is click on this link, which is nmopportunity.com, and see if your address is in an opportunity zone. If it is, then you have potential to incent and motivate, attract investment money into your area to fund your project. This might be something that fits. So we could explore that. And I will make a pitch. I'm going to talk about it in just a second, but we're going to actually have an Opportunity Zone webinar in a few hours I think starting at 1:30. So I'll get you that information and we can talk more about that in depth. Impact investors, this can be an interesting source of additional funding, maybe to fill a gap or a need. In terms of impact investors, these oftentimes are in the nonprofit. These are social foundations interested in socially beneficial projects. ways that you can get a hold of these folks, you could look at New Mexico Grant Makers Association. A lot of the foundations, the philanthropic foundations, are affiliated with that group, as well as the community foundations. And we have, I think, 5 community foundations in New Mexico, and that is Taos, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and I'm forgetting New Mexico as a state. But you can go to New Mexico Community Foundations Association and connect with them, start some conversations and see if that leads anywhere. And then New Markets Tax Credits, this was mentioned, but NMFA actually handles our allotment. And the great thing about tax credits, and sometimes it fits with housing development projects, sometimes not. I think, you know, there's a number of qualifications around eligibility for the particular projects, but you can look outside of the state. There are plenty of New Markets Tax Credits lenders out there that can lend nationally, not just focused on their region. So follow up on those links. And we are going to, oh yes, and I do need to mention Fund It. I'm going to blow through this, but Fund It is our group within New Mexico Economic Development Department that we can talk about housing projects. And basically the idea behind Fund It is that this is a group, we meet quarterly, but we bring all the folks with money to the table. And so if you have a project that involves economic development or community development, housing falls into that, or infrastructure, you can pitch to the group of funders at one time. And so you can get direct feedback, insight, knowledge, experience, guidance about where to go to find funding for your project. And most of the time when we hear projects are funded, some funding has already been secured and you're looking for gap, you're looking for some additional funding. That's where most of the projects are, but we have a feature within Fund It that we can help you brainstorm too. You know, and if you're just kind of in the idea phase or even looking for money for a plan, this is a great place to go. And let me show you some resources. Here's the link to go to apply to Fund It. Really simple. I think it's like 2-page summary of your project. We also have a resource map that is on our website that you can kind of filter through funding sources that are available per component. So if you can see on this left-hand column, housing is on there. So you'd click on housing, maybe you're a rural area, maybe you're a tribal entity, maybe you're looking for a grant versus loan, and you can get some good ideas of where to go for funding. And Fund It webinars, these webinars that you're participating in is a part of kind of the education arm within Fund It. How do we get information about financing opportunities out there for projects? So let's open it up for questions. We have a little bit of time. Oh my gosh, we're getting close to 11:30. So let me get to some of these questions. And if the panelists, so we can answer a lot of questions, if you keep your answers kind of brief. Let's see. Has anyone put together a package of housing tax credits that can be matched with Opportunity Zone? And they say tax credits. But go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, this is Daniel. This is something that comes up a lot, and the thing that people don't realize, there aren't compatible types of tax liability. So the tax credits, the low-income housing tax credits, are being used to shelter federal income tax liability. Opportunity zones are focused on capital gains exposure. And so the type of investors that buy tax credits do not need the opportunity zone benefits. Because I was initially excited about this idea, and what we ended up finding out is that it really has zero impact even on our tax credit pricing. So unfortunately, they're not really compatible. And frankly, in many ways, opportunity zones are potentially sort of disruptive by encouraging market rate housing development in economically depressed areas. It has some gentrification implications. So like affordable housing folks like us don't really like the design of the opportunity zones, ones because it doesn't leverage existing affordable housing stuff. And a lot of what we talk about in communities that have really active opportunity zones is trying to put guardrails on those programs to make sure that you leverage some community benefit out of it, rather than sort of the free-for-all approach of how it's designed. But the quick answer is they're not really compatible because of the different types of tax debt you're trying to shelter there.
Good point. And that is a really good point for discussion too, to explore further. Because I mean, I'd even say that even though the program, how it's organized and going right now, there's still potential to really manage and craft a good project that is socially responsible and in an affordable housing development project. There are still, there's plenty of investors out there that are focused on not getting market rate return, but
Right.
You got to work hard though, for sure, to find them. But let's see. There is a question that Ken asked about, is there a list of nonprofit developers out there? Anybody have any?
That's a good question. Not that I know of. And I know that you can sort of reach out to MFA and they can tell you some of the ones that work either statewide or in your region. Another thing to do is you can look at the MFA's LIHTC page and just look at the past year's applications and awards, and you'll see various organizations that have applied and been awarded funds, and that can give you an idea of who's competitive.
Great. We had
and
question.
That's a suggestion. We don't maintain a separate list, maybe looking at past projects, and we don't maintain a separate list of nonprofit developers or for-profit developers.
Okay, thank y'all. Had a question from Elise saying, any thoughts about attracting housing developers to rural communities where subcontractors are scarce?
One of the hardest problems in New Mexico. Rural areas are really not only challenging in terms of capacity, but also the cost to develop there is high. The last project before Siler we worked on was in Carlsbad, New Mexico. And we found, partly because of the Permian, but also because a lot of our subcontractors were coming from as far away as Las Cruces, that the development costs in the rural areas are really, really high. And right now, there's no way to differentiate in state funding programs between high-cost development areas and low-cost development areas. So you go into the competition for funding slightly disadvantaged. So one thing that could help with that is working with the state to promote more equitable ways of measuring things like use of subsidy funds that actually differentiates between high cost to develop areas and lower cost to develop areas would be one. But it's typically really challenging at every stage, not just development, but operation, every level of it is challenging, and there's really no silver bullet for that. MFA has made some great changes in recent years in terms of adding scoring criteria for rural areas, places that have not had tax credit awards in recent years, and so that's certainly helpful. But being able to leverage local resources to help offset some of those higher costs can really help get some of those more rural projects developed. The other challenge is that rural projects are going to be smaller, and for things like 9% low-income housing tax credits, and Sean talked about this a little bit, there's quite a bit of sort of fixed soft costs that are related to the transaction, things like lawyers and syndicators and all these things that are probably sometimes close to about $500,000 in the project. So the smaller the project, the higher those costs are relative, and that disadvantages you in the overall competition for funding. So that's the other trick is finding the sweet spot for projects is typically, we see some smaller ones, but around 60 units is about the right size for a 9% tax credit project. And you see some smaller ones, but they're really challenging to get the numbers to work on.
Yeah, this is Kevin Drexel. I just want to add that there are some challenges. There's certainly labor force challenges for contractors and developers. I'm glad that BPublic was on, because I do think in rural areas we probably need to look at prefab modular construction that does reduce construction times and kind of reduces the labor force requirements that draw out the construction process. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at in some of these hard to reach places, is prefab and modular.
All right, great. Thank y'all. And we're past 11:30, so I apologize about the other questions that we got, but we have the contact information for all of the panelists. They're very friendly, so please reach out. Let's continue the conversation. And some of these questions that we've got, as we've already seen, are perfect for even additional webinars to explore topics like specifically housing development in rural areas, or even looking at how do you use opportunity zones or some other kind of more alternative financing to look at how to finance some of these projects. So really quickly, here's some events that we have coming up with the department. Fund It, that I mentioned, great place to discuss housing development projects. Our first meeting of 2020 will be in March, so you've got plenty of time to kind of figure that out. You can apply at that link. Next webinar series will be about how to finance food systems. That'll be I didn't put the date, but that'll be the last Thursday of January. And you can go ahead and register on that. We've got some really good panelists that'll be talking about that. Our Opportunity Zone Roundtable webinar, which I mentioned, will be, I think it's at 1:30, 1 or 1:30. I'm probably not going to get this webinar, the presentation, sent out to you before then. So if you are interested in attending that and you haven't registered already, go ahead and email me, and that's it's spelled like Johanna, johanna.nelson@state.nm.us, and I'll get you the link. We have an Opportunity Zones Marketplace/resource fair that's coming up in March, and that'll be probably in Albuquerque, but a chance to come if you have a project and if you're a resource. And the idea is let's match our projects with resources. And then we are actively enrolling projects into our collateral assistance program. This is helping businesses that are trying to get business loans but lack collateral. The state can come in, purchase a CD to cover that gap. So there's where you enroll. And then we have a big event coming up, the Central New Mexico Finance Fair. This is going to happen January 16th. This is if you have a business, if you have a project that you're looking for some type of a financing, mostly commercial. This is pretty much geared toward businesses, but you can come to this event. It's free, and we're going to have probably around 30, 40 different lenders there just to talk about your project. So it really gives you some leverage, because you can shop your project around and meet directly with lenders. And then want to remind everybody the legislative session is coming up starting January 21st. So, I think some legislation was brought up in this presentation. If you've got issues with it, problems, contact your legislator, and we'll see how that goes. These are our regional reps representing the department, all areas of the state. New Mexico Main Street is also in our department. Here's our contact. So without taking any more of your time, I want to wish you much gratitude. Thanks so much for tuning in, and big thanks to all of the panelists. You guys did a fantastic job, and you're doing great work around the state. So thank you so much for your time and sharing this information, and happy holidays to everyone, and hope to see you on the next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great holiday season.
Bye.